I'm going to start this episode with a couple of hypothetical situations. Imagine someone who's genuinely impressively brave. They run towards danger when others run away. They hold their nerve under pressure. In a crisis, they are the person everyone wants at their side. Now imagine the same person using that courage for something that's illegal or immoral. They are brave in the act of doing something genuinely harmful. They face down their own fear to do something that should just not be done. Is that courage admirable? Or imagine someone of extraordinary self-discipline. They control their appetites perfectly, food, drink, pleasure, or comfort. Their capacity for restraint is almost superhuman, but they exercise that restraint purely for personal advantage with no regard for anyone around them. Their temperance is in service of a character that is cold, self-serving and calculating. Is that temperance genuinely virtuous? The Stoics looked at cases like these and drew a conclusion that surprises almost everyone who comes to it for the first time. The Stoics said, no, those aren't genuine virtues at all. What you've described is a capacity, a skill, a disposition that resembles virtue from the outside, but lacks the essential ingredient that makes it a virtue in the true moral sense. Today we're going to explore what that essential ingredient is, and in doing so we discover that the four Stoic virtues of wisdom, courage, justice and temperance aren't four separate qualities you can use piecemeal. They are four aspects of a single underlying excellence. You can't genuinely have one without having all of them. Now that claim may seem counterintuitive, but in this episode I'll attempt to explain why. Welcome back to the Stoic Mind Mechanic. My name's Tim Howell. In our last episode we made the case for the central Stoic ethical claim that virtue, arete or excellence, is the only genuine good. Today we're going to go deeper on that claim and ask, what is virtue really made of? What are its parts and what is the relationship between those parts? The Stoics inherited the four cardinal virtues, wisdom, courage, justice and temperance from Plato, but gave them a distinctive practical and actionable interpretation and, crucially, a doctrine of their unity that Plato himself hadn't explored. It's that doctrine of unity that I think is the most important and underappreciated idea in Stoic ethics. My hope is that by the end of this episode you'll think so too. But let's begin at the beginning with each virtue on its own terms. Wisdom. Drawing on work from Aristotle, the Stoics used two Greek words for wisdom, and the distinction between them matters. Sophia is theoretical wisdom, the deep understanding of how things are, the nature of reality, the structure of the good, the principles by which a life ought to be governed. It's the kind of wisdom that comes from serious, sustained philosophical study, the wisdom of understanding. Phronesis is the practical wisdom, the ability to apply that theoretical understanding to specific, real and even messy situations. The wisdom of knowing what to do in this particular circumstance with these particular people giving these particular constraints. It isn't enough to know in general that justice is a virtue. Phronesis is the capacity to recognize what justice requires of you right now, today, in the situation you are actually in. The Stoics considered phronesis the master virtue, the one that governs and enables all the others. Without it, courage becomes recklessness, justice becomes rigid rule-following that produces unjust outcomes, temperance becomes joyless austerity rather than genuine self-governance. Every other virtue needs wisdom to know when and how to express itself. And here's the thing about wisdom that makes it difficult rather than demanding. It can't be fully learned by study. It grows through reflected experience, through making decisions, observing the consequences, examining where your judgment was sound and where it failed, and then returning to the question with a better calibration next time. Wisdom is the fruit of a life lived with full focus and careful attention, and that's why the Stoic practice of journaling, evening review and daily self-examination aren't optional extras. They are the mechanism by which experience is converted into wisdom. Without the reflection, the experience simply passes by. With reflection, the experience teaches us. It is not that I am wise, but that I am a lover of wisdom, and that love shows itself not in knowing, but in the willingness to keep examining. Next, we discuss courage. Courage in the Stoic tradition isn't simply bravery in the face of physical danger, though it includes that. The Stoics define the Greek word andreia as the virtue that governs our relationship to everything that might intimidate us into abandoning what's right. Physical courage is the most obvious form, the willingness to endure pain, injury, or death rather than act dishonourably. The soldier who holds their position, the person who runs toward a burning building, and the patient who faces a devastating diagnosis without self-pity or denial. Now, these are genuine expressions of Stoic courage, but the Stoics were equally, perhaps more, interested in what we might call moral courage. The willingness to say the true thing when the false thing would be easier. The willingness to act justly when injustice would be more comfortable. The willingness to hold a position under social pressure when the pressure is wrong. The willingness, as Epictetus put it, to bear what must be borne and to forbear what must be forborne. Physical danger is usually obvious, the moment when you must choose whether to say the difficult true thing to a powerful person or stay silent and maintain your comfort. That moment can be very easy to slide past without ever quite deciding, which is precisely why Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius write about it so insistently. The Stoics knew it was the form of courage most likely to fail in ordinary life. There's also a third form of courage that the Stoics emphasized and that modern life rarely names: the courage of endurance, the steady, undramatic willingness to persist through difficulty that has no resolution on the horizon. Not the explosive courage of a single moment of decision, but the quiet courage of continuing, of not giving up, not collapsing into self-pity, not abandoning the practice when it stops feeling meaningful and starts feeling merely hard. Cleanthes hauling water at night to pay for his philosophical education is an image of this kind of courage. It's unglamorous, it doesn't make a good story at a dinner party, but the Stoics would argue the form of courage that most of us need most often. So moving on to justice. Justice is the most socially oriented of the four virtues, and this really matters for understanding what Stoicism actually is. There's a common misreading of the philosophy as fundamentally self-focused, concerned only with your own inner state, your own psychological freedom, your own response to your own circumstances. Justice corrects that misreading with firm confidence. The Stoics were insistent that the good life isn't a solitary achievement. It's lived in relation to others, in community, in the web of obligations and responsibilities that constitute a human social existence. And justice is the virtue that governs all of that. The Stoic use of the Greek word dikaiosune means more than following rules or respecting rights, though it includes both. It means the inclination to give each person and each situation exactly what's genuinely owed, no more, no less. It means seeing people as they actually are rather than as you would prefer them to be for your own convenience. It means acting for the common good even when acting only for yourself would be easier and more profitable. Marcus Aurelius returns to justice more than any other virtue in Meditations. He reminds himself repeatedly of his obligations to others when he writes, "We are made for cooperation, like feet, like hands, like eyelids, like the rows of the upper and lower teeth. To act against one another, then, is contrary to nature." Made for cooperation. That phrase carries the full weight of the Stoic cosmological vision, the idea that human beings aren't isolated units, but nodes in a rational social order that has its own purpose and its own claims on each of us. To act justly isn't to follow an external rule imposed from outside. It's to act in accordance with what you most deeply are, a social, rational being whose flourishing is inseparable from the flourishing of those around you. This is where the Stoic doctrine of cosmopolitanism lives, the idea that our obligations don't stop at the borders of our family, our tribe, our nation, but extend to all rational beings everywhere. Marcus Aurelius, governing an empire, took this seriously in ways that were very unusual for the times. Seneca, a former slave and Marcus an emperor, reached the same conclusion about the circle of moral concern, that it has no natural limit. Last and by no means least, we look at temperance. Temperance is the virtue most in need of rehabilitation for a modern audience because its common meaning has almost completely inverted its Stoic meaning. The Stoics used the Greek word sophrosyne, which is often translated as moderation or self-control or self-discipline. And those translations aren't wrong, but they carry a connotation of restriction, of wanting something and denying yourself that thing, of pleasure foregone and appetite frustrated. That isn't the Stoic conception. For the Stoics, sophrosyne is better understood as the right ordering of desire, not the suppression of desire, but its proper calibration, wanting the right things in the right amounts for the right reasons. A person of genuine temperance isn't someone constantly fighting their desires. They are someone whose desires are already well ordered so that the fight is largely unnecessary. Think of it this way. A person who desperately wants to eat the entire cake but forces themselves to eat only one slice is exercising self-control. That is commendable, but it isn't yet sophrosyne. A person who has over time and through genuine philosophical practice arrived at a place where one slice is genuinely satisfying, who doesn't feel the pull of the rest of the cake as a frustrated desire but simply as irrelevant, that person has something closer to what the Stoics mean. The distinction matters because self-control is exhausting and fragile. Research in modern psychology confirms what the Stoics suspected. Willpower is a limited resource that depletes. Relying on willpower as your primary tool for managing desire is, as most people discover through experience, not a sustainable strategy. But the person who has genuinely recalibrated their desires through sustained philosophical practice, who's come to genuinely want less from the category of external indifference, that person isn't fighting themselves. They are free, and that freedom is what sophrosyne actually names. Seneca describes it with characteristic clarity. The goal isn't to need less through gritted teeth, but to discover that less is genuinely enough. Not poverty as punishment, but simplicity as a form of liberation. Now I want to return to the claim I made at the opening, the one I said I needed to explain. The Stoics held that the four virtues aren't four separate qualities that a person might possess in varying combinations. They are four aspects of a single underlying state of character, and the doctrine, the part that surprises almost everyone, is this: you can't genuinely have one without having all of them. This seems obviously wrong at first. Surely we all know people who are brave but not particularly just, disciplined but not especially wise, fair-minded but perhaps lacking the courage their convictions would seem to require. The Stoic response is to distinguish between a genuine virtue and what they call a natural predisposition, what we might today call a character trait or a talent. Being naturally courageous, having a temperament that isn't easily frightened, isn't the same as possessing the virtue of courage in the Stoic sense. Being naturally disciplined isn't the same as sophrosyne. Natural traits can exist independently of each other. The virtues, properly understood, cannot. Here's why. Let's return to wisdom, phronesis, the master virtue. Genuine practical wisdom requires knowing what is actually worth doing in any given situation. But knowing what is worth doing requires understanding what is genuinely good, which is a question of justice. And being willing to do it under pressure requires courage, and doing it without being deflected by excessive desire requires temperance. In other words, genuine wisdom can't operate without courage to act on what it sees, justice to orient it towards the right ends, and temperance to keep it undistorted by appetite. Remove any one of those and the wisdom degrades, becomes partial, becomes self-serving, and becomes unreliable under pressure. The same interdependence runs in every direction. Genuine courage requires wisdom to distinguish genuine threats from imagined ones, justice to ensure it's directed towards the right ends, and temperance to prevent it tipping into recklessness. Genuine justice requires wisdom to know what is actually owed, courage to give it even when it's costly, and temperance to prevent it being distorted by self-interest. The four virtues are, as the Stoics saw it, four different angles on a single thing. The fully excellent human character, a character in which reason operates clearly, desire is well ordered, social obligations are honoured, and the will to act on all of this under pressure is reliably present. The practical implication is real and significant. You can't work on courage as if it were a separate project from justice, or wisdom as if it had nothing to do with temperance. The work is all one work. Every time you practice honesty under social pressure, you're developing both courage and justice simultaneously. Every time you examine your desires and ask whether they're well ordered, you're practicing both temperance and wisdom. The virtues train together because they are, at the deepest level, one and the same thing. I want to close with something that Marcus Aurelius wrote in a passage that's always struck me as one of the most quietly radical things in meditations. Nowhere can a man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul. Make use of it. That retreat, that quiet, untroubled place, isn't a natural endowment. It isn't given to you at birth and simply there to be discovered. It's built through wisdom by learning over the years what actually matters and what doesn't. Through courage by doing the difficult thing enough times that it becomes your natural response. Through justice by extending your care outward until the well-being of others feels as real and as important as your own. Through temperance by wanting genuinely and without self-deception exactly what is good for you. The four virtues aren't a checklist. They aren't four boxes to tick. They are the architecture of a particular kind of character, and that character, once built, is genuinely unassailable. Not unfeeling, not indifferent, but stable in a way that external circumstances can't touch, because its foundations are interior. So your reflection for the episode of the four virtues. Which of them do you feel most distant from right now? Not which one are you worst at in some absolute sense, but which one is most conspicuously absent in the challenges your life is presenting you with today? Once you answer that question, it will tell you what you need to work on. In our next episode, we turn to what many people consider the most practically powerful idea in all of Stoic philosophy, the dichotomy of control, the distinction between what is and what isn't in our power. We've met this idea in passing in the biographical episodes. Now we're going to give it the full extended treatment it deserves, including the practical exercises the Stoics developed for applying it, and the modern psychological evidence for why it works. If this series has been useful to you, please like and subscribe. It's the single most effective thing you can do to support this channel and help it reach the people who might genuinely need it. In the meantime, keep calm, keep stoic, and I'll see you in the next one.